This video was brought to you by Henson Shaving. Nearly 1 year into power, support for the largest party in the Netherlands' governing coalition, the Far-Right Party for Freedom, or PVV, led by Geert Wilders, has completely dropped. After reaching a historic high of 33% in the polls last April, support for the PVV has steadily declined, with them dropping 10 percentage points and even losing their lead, as voters become increasingly concerned about the PVV's ability to effectively govern. Then this Monday, after revealing a plan to radically slash immigration, Wilders has once again threatened to pull his PVV party out of the coalition if his plan wasn't implemented. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how the PVV came to power, why its voters are pretty unhappy with its governance, and what could happen next. If you're a fan of the channel, did you know that we also run TLDR Global, our channel where we run down the biggest news stories from around the world, including border tensions in Asia or wars in Africa, to economic issues facing the US, and even why this South American leader is so unpopular. Check out the news from all around the world and subscribe today by searching for TLDR Global. First, let's start with some context on how the incumbent Dutch government actually came to power. In November 2023, the Dutch general election saw Wilders' PVV win 37 seats in the 150-seat House of Representatives, becoming the largest party for the first time, a position that had previously been held by the centre-right People's Party, the VVD, since 2010. These results were obviously a massive victory for Wilders, who campaigned on an anti-Islam, anti-immigration, Eurosceptic platform, promising to ensure that, quote, the Dutch get their country back. However, this didn't go down well with the other right-wing parties. The leaders of the VVD, Dylan Jezielkus, and the centre-right New Social Contract, Pieter Omtzigt, signalled that they wouldn't serve in a cabinet led by Wilders. Now, this was partly because of Wilders' highly controversial views, but also due to a lack of trust in his party's ability to actually handle the public finances. Anyway, coalition talks ended up collapsing early February last year after the NSC pulled out, and as a result, Wilders was forced to publicly concede that he would not be Dutch Prime Minister in order to get the other parties back on board. Luckily for Wilders though, after around 6 months of coalition talks, last May 4 parties, Wilders' PVV, the VVD, NSC and Farmers' Citizen Movement, or BBB, finally announced a coalition agreement. In order to get the other party's support, Wilders had dropped some of his more radical policies, including a ban on the Quran and mosques, as well as cutting back his spending plans, including on free public transport. But anyway, 1 year in, things aren't looking too great for the government, which is now led by former civil servant Dick Schoof. In March, a survey by RTL News found that just 1 in 6 voters had confidence in their government, and only 10% think that the government is taking good measures. VVD supporters were the most critical though, with 50% saying the VVD should form a coalition with the main left-wing opposition party at the next election. Meanwhile, the PVV have also dropped in the polls, and recent projections put the Green Left Labour alliance on basically the same seat count. So, what's gone so wrong for the PVV and its governing coalition? Well, according to recent polls, the main source of voter dissatisfaction with the PVV stems from the perception that the far-right party has failed to deliver on its manifesto promises. Beyond immigration, one of the most pressing issues among the Dutch electorate remains the country's ongoing housing crisis, which is considered to be one of the most severe in Europe, with an estimated need for approximately 390,000 new homes to address the significant shortage. So far though, many Dutch citizens are unhappy with how the government is handling this problem. For example, the government recently proposed a plan to freeze social housing rents for 2 years, but this measure faced considerable backlash. Critics argue that it contradicts the coalition's original agreement to focus on building more homes, and is seen as a superficial quick fix to a much deeper issue. On paper, lowering rents sounds beneficial, because lower income earners get the opportunity to save more money, but it doesn't actually address the fundamental problem, the low supply of housing. There are also concerns that these rent freezes could lead to a halt in construction, as housing corporations, which have already taken legal action against the government, might receive less funding and therefore lack the resources to actually build new homes. Additionally, lowering rents could result in more houses being sold on the market, reducing the affordable housing supply and increasing demand further. Moreover, it's unlikely this rent freeze will even pass in Parliament, as the governing coalition lacks a majority and needs opposition support. Since opposition parties dismiss the plan as a bit of a stupid idea, this policy is likely to end in failure for Wilders. Another problem plaguing the coalition is political infighting. For instance, last November the coalition faced a crisis after Junior Minister Noura Ashabar resigned amid violent clashes involving local and Israeli football fans in Amsterdam. Ashabar from the NSC party cited alleged racist comments made by other ministers during a cabinet meeting as the reason for her stepping down. Then this month, the foreign minister's decision to request an EU review of the bloc's association agreement with Israel due to concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza sparked further tension. Wilders criticised what he called the government's ridiculous anti-Israel measures and questioned why his party wasn't consulted. The Dutch Prime Minister responded by backing the foreign minister's decision, stating that Wilders' approval was unnecessary. Meanwhile, public opinion is shifting. About 27% of voters now oppose the Netherlands' relatively soft diplomatic stance on Israel, up from 19% in September, and 54% want the government to adopt a more critical approach. Still, this isn't the first time that Wilders has clashed with cabinet members and coalition partners. On multiple occasions, he's threatened to trigger crises unless his legislative demands on immigration are met. For example, in October last year, he sought to declare a nationwide state of emergency to push through stricter asylum measures without parliamentary approval. Then, early this year in February, Wilders caused an uproar by threatening to withdraw from the coalition and call new elections unless his proposed changes to tighten asylum laws were adopted. Evidently, the PVV's inability to deliver on promises, coupled with internal conflicts and political clashes, has significantly undermined its credibility and effectiveness as a governing force. So, can the PVV regain its popularity after this pretty terrible year in power? Well, looking at broader trends across Northern Europe, it's not looking too good for the PVV. Following Donald Trump's return to the White House, support for mainstream left-wing parties in countries like Denmark, Norway and Sweden seem to be on the rise, as voters appear to be shifting towards more established parties as concerns about global stability and the looming economic downturn grow. Furthermore, anti-Trump sentiment across Europe has never been higher. In the Netherlands, a recent poll found that 60% of Dutch people consider Trump to be an enemy of Europe, with only 8% saying they consider him a friend. This doesn't bode too well for Wilders, who has long been an admirer of Trump and is often called the Dutch Trump. Wilders has so far steered away from openly criticising Trump, but this could backfire for him pretty soon and may inflict further damage on Wilders' support and deepen his party's decline. Now, lots of people actively don't like shaving, and it's getting increasingly expensive, with razor brands selling overpriced cartridges stuffed with useless technology. And even if you do pay for all of it, you're often going to be left with a bad shave anyway. Razor burn, ingrown hairs, and irritation. That's a problem that Henson aimed to solve with their new razor. So in typical TLDR style, let me explain why Henson's razors are better for 3 reasons. Firstly, Henson's AL13 razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, holds blades at a perfect 30-degree angle, extending the blade just 0.0013 inches past the shave plane. That's less than the thickness of a human hair. Now, that's important because it keeps the blades supported properly, unlike many other companies' blades, and ensures a better protection for your skin. Secondly, they're just cheaper. Those fancy blade cartridges are full of single-use junk, which makes each individual blade way more expensive than what you actually need. By contrast, Henson's razor just takes totally standard blades, which cost just a few cents. And that means that you can both save money and refresh your blades more often, so that you don't need to keep dragging a dull razor across your face to try and get value out of that overpriced plastic. Finally, speaking of plastic, those cartridges aren't good for the environment either, with 2 billion razor cartridges thrown away each year in the US alone. That's just not true of Henson's blades, which contain 0 plastic, even in their packaging. So if you want to try it out, go to hensonshaving.com/TLDR or click the link in the description, and then add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Once you've done that, you just need to apply code TLDR at checkout and you'll get all of those blades absolutely free. Plus, they'll know you came from us, which really helps us out too.